back, everybody. Yes, Kara, that's 4 times with the soundboard. I hope everybody is just not scratching their ears out. I don't know. I think it's kind of a happy little ditty. What do you think, Megan?
It's certainly making me laugh.
I love it. Hey, everybody, welcome to the last hour of the xAPI playlist here on TLDC. And we are super excited to have Megan Torrance with us. Hi, Megan.
Hey.
Thanks for hanging out with us and being our...
Your mug shout out with Craig Wiggins. So I have my xAPI mug for this.
There you go. Everyone's got to have their coffee. In order for me to get through 4 hours of this straight, I need a few cups. But it's all good. It's all good. So we've had some, let me just start by just maybe doing a little bit of a wrap up here. So we started off with Craig Wiggins this morning, talking to us about sort of the basics of xAPI and LRS. And we went in a lot of different directions around that. Mel and Ross from Amazon jumped in and showed us a little bit of their project that they're working on for the xAPI cohort, which was fantastic. And then we had, we just finished up with Kristen Anthony, who showed us her app that she created. Coincidentally enough, learning about xAPI through the xAPI cohort as well, which seems to be a really, really cool way for people to learn about xAPI. And so we are extremely lucky now to follow it all up with the person who actually started that whole xAPI cohort thing and runs it and manages it, at least as far as I know.
Actually, it's super funny and very apropos that you started the day with Craig and then a whole lot of cohort, because I didn't start the cohort. So Aaron Silvers started the cohort. Craig then ran the cohort, and I remember I will never forget actually the day in July 2015, sitting in Craig's office in Virginia, when he told me that he was no longer going to be running the cohort, and ADL was not going to be able to support it. And my team had just finished a project through the cohort. I found it completely transformative. It wasn't our first xAPI project, but it sure did inform all the rest of them. And in I would say weak moment, but actually in a moment of like, I'm going to do this, I said, well, somebody's cohort. So we started doing it. We ran a pilot group of personally picked, like hand-picked people. Our first cohort, the fall of 2015, was 35 people. Mm-hmm. We averaged the next 3 cohorts about 100 people per cohort. In the fall, we had over 350. Now we have over 650 registered in the spring 2018 cohort. We have there's some projects flux over the weekend, but I think we have about 15 active projects running. We have a really, really active Slack channel and weekly web session that kind of strings it all together and provides almost a curriculum, if you will. So the cohort totally rocks.
Yeah, so it is unbelievable. I mean, the value that people get out of it, I hear consistently, is just, thumbs up all the way. I mean, people are really enjoying that and knowing that it's coming around every time they hear so much about it, and then they're like, dang it, I didn't get involved this time. They look forward to the next one that comes around, which is why I think it keeps growing.
Well, it's kind of cool. And I have to give a serious shout out to Allison Hess on our team, who's actually the weekly host, and she is in the Slack channel. She is making sure things are moving around and helping people. Cleaver on my team, and Peter Gunther, now as of today on our team, are in and helping people as needed, and lots of good stuff going on there. And I mentioned it in the chat in one of the previous sessions today, Brent, but xAPI cohort, when we started doing it and picked it up from ADL, it was really, really important to me that it was as much like xAPI itself, right? It is open. It is not a commercial venture. And while Torrance Learning has the we provide the muscle and the Adobe Connect license and stuff like that, which we keep having to up because we get more and more people to sign in. It's not our thing. Like, we keep it separately. The mail list is separate. It's not the Torrance learning cohort. It's the xAPI learning cohort, and that's really important to us. So it's been super fun, and then we wrap it up just like ADL did. I mean, we actually follow ADL's model, and pretty much all that Craig and Aaron had laid out. So it's been pretty cool. And so what you've had today is like a really awesome opportunity to hear like actual projects and people and things that are doing, and those are great stepping stones, right, for getting in. And Arun Pradhan had a post on LinkedIn a few weeks ago where he basically saw the like a progression of getting involved with xAPI, right? And the first was spelling it, being able to figure it out, right? And then the next was, and I'm going to get this wrong, so I'm apologizing in advance, Arun. The next was really about getting some basic data like into a learning record store. And then the next was, actually setting up with real data, right? So those two spaces are really around where the cohort is.
Yeah.
It then gets into enterprise learning and then enterprise performance, which is happening just at a little less. So we spent a lot of time on cohort. And what I was thinking about is maybe, kind of if we wanted to look at either state of adoption, state of the industry, or kind of what's going on in some of the enterprise scale stuff that I'm starting to see.
Yeah, I would actually love to talk about that. I mean, let's take it up to that strategic level and have that conversation and just kind of see where we're at and figure that out. And if you've got, because I think you sit in a very unique spot where you get to see what's going on and kind of where those trends are going. And I think xAPI has landed on the trends lists every year, since it was a thing. But what's that reality look like?
Yeah, and you're right. It did land. I remember in 2013, we had a project that we were kicking off with the Ann Arbor Hands-On Museum, and I said, "Wow, this seems like a great use case for xAPI." So what I do, I call up my LMS guy, and I said, "Hey, do you guys do this xAPI thing?" And you could hear like click, 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 click as they're Googling it. Fortunately, right, the answer was, yeah, let me figure that out.
Yeah.
Right. And let's do this together. And so one of the things I see in the LMS space, right, we were talking about with Craig earlier, with the LMS space, the great big LMSs, this is a totally different way of looking at data, a completely different way of thinking about things. And so they have been slower, and they've been on that side of, is this just a fad?
Yeah.
Can we get a little bit more coherence around what we're talking about? Because SCORM it's a thing.
It's very
right? It's a thing.
what it
it's
is.
Entirely predictable, right?
Yeah.
Entirely predictable. And if I'm going to run an enterprise global business supporting something, SCORM is going to be where it's at, right? And that's why SCORM exists. And I think with xAPI, as we're starting to get more standards around not standards, specific around the specification, around what data are we sending, what data are we receiving, when we're in a learning management system, what does it look like, and what are those SCORM-esque things that xAPI has to do to kind of like table stakes getting in with the CMI5 specification. That's huge, absolutely huge, right?
Yep.
So that's big. And what I've seen is the bigger LMSs are slower to move. And if I were a bigger LMS, that's what I did. The mid-size LMSs, there's this great tier of LMSs that are early adopters, including the one that I called up in 2013, right?
Yeah.
And they moved towards xAPI. They built it into their LMSs, and they are in a position to offer that suite that you need. Right? So you need to manage learning. Most organizations, right, need to manage learning. Where is the catalog of things that I'm supposed to do?
Yeah.
As an employee, where is my transcript as an employee? What are people doing? Have people done the required things that they need them to do? And what is our marketplace for learning from the formal learning that exists? Love informal learning. It doesn't mean that formal learning isn't important anymore.
Right.
So the LMS has a purpose, right? So these baked in systems are really, really useful. So you've got a couple of them. If my concern is that if I start listing them, I'm going to miss somebody and owe them drink something or something for not missing a lot.
That's
right?
All right.
But on point, risk, UL. So the LMS that we use is UL's compliance to performance LMS. And they bought the LearnShare LMS, and so they're the ones that we use as our workhorse. And those systems are these really neat hybrids, so they can accept transactions from outside as well as inside. On the sending data in, it's becoming more and more geek free. Right. And that's, we were talking before, and I think you can almost see the virtual eyes going like, oh my gosh, as you watch Mel and Ross and Kristen show code, and people start like, what do I need libraries? What do I do? What is a library? What do all these things? Right. And in order, but if you think about it, right, from an e-learning perspective, nobody does SCORM.
Yeah.
Thank goodness somebody does SCORM, right? The fine folks at Articulate and Adobe and Domino and Lectora and all those places, right? They do SCORM, and my LMS does SCORM, and so I don't have to do SCORM. I get to focus on the learning and the media and all that stuff, right? With xAPI now, I still focus on the learning and the media. I also focus on the data. But if I'm using a tool that's doing the heavy lifting for me, I don't have to focus on the code.
Yep.
So I may be the first person on your call today who is not allowed to touch the JavaScript because I might screw something up.
No, but I mean, can you kind of see it? I mean, I think once everybody embraces it, we won't have to, it'll be very soon too, I think, where we won't have to worry about all that code that everybody, that Melissa just showed us and that Kristen showed us. It's good. It's always good to know how that stuff works. I think if you're curious and you're in this industry and you deal with tech at all, at least looking at it and not being freaked out is a great step one, right? Yes. You don't have to swear that you're going to be the one that does it and writes it and all that, but just don't be scared when you see it, I think is a great place to be and to be aware of what it is. But at some point, it's going to be a drag and drop in our authoring tools, right? Or something. It's going to be like, oh, you just created a button. That's an action for a user. Would you like to send an xAPI statement? Yes. And it does all the work behind the scenes for you.
Yep.
All you have to do as a designer is make that decision. Yeah, do I want to send that as another bit of data to the system? Oh, you're creating a drag and drop thing? Would you like every single instance to send an xAPI statement? Oh, no, that's okay. Not this round. Okay, no, don't. And then it doesn't do it and you move on, right? I mean, I'm kind of making this up as I go, but I see that just having seen the progression of authoring tools throughout the last 20, 25 years, it's just a matter of time before it becomes that easy.
It really is. And some of those tools are that easy, right? Some of those tools are not so easy. So they say they send xAPI, and so here, so let me back up for a little bit, right? From a learning record store perspective, you and Craig were talking about it being a dumb box, right? The learning record store's job is, and none of them is dumb. Actually, they all provide, data and visualizations and everything else. But the LRS part of it, the learning record store, the receiver of the data, has to meet, it's like 1,400 different specific jobs it has to do in a specific and specified way. And if it does that, it passes a conformance test. It's got its good housekeeping seal. You move on, right? Okay. And so you should be able to expect those things. And then they offer a suite of things around that core dumb box. Wow, that's great. I'm like making all this suite of things around the core dumb box that's in the middle, which is my head. What not to do on a live stream.
Visual.
I should stop talking with my hands. The dumb box.
There we go. Trying to figure that out.
There you go. From the data sending perspective, there is no specification, no conformance test that says these are good statements.
Yeah.
So it gets a little interesting. So some tools are really good at sending data. Some tools are really crummy at sending data. And we can maybe have a talk for another day. There's actually a cohort project, a two cohort session project looking at how different data,
awesome.
which is excellent. But those are the e-learning tools, right? So e-learning's easy, right? So here, from the industry perspective, the thing that will replace SCORM seems like a logical thing for the e-learning course providers to adopt, right? So they're doing it. They're all doing it, right? It's the things that never had to deal with SCORM before that don't see a purpose. For a while, there was no purpose in them doing SCORM because complete for my mobile app, that's my performance coaching tool, doesn't mean anything. Complete for a mentoring relationship doesn't mean anything. Complete for the High Ropes Leadership Challenge course doesn't mean anything, right, to my LMS. And so it didn't work for them. The piece that's tricky then is not only did SCORM not mean anything, so they were to them, so xAPI seemed like a less logical thing. There's also no pre-existing set of rules for doing that, for making all those interoperable. So here's the thing with xAPI. It's easy. I just saw somebody put in the chat, right? Megan says, thanks, John.
You will forever go down in history with that out of context quote right there.
Well, I'm about to make another one, right?
Oh, good.
The other one is that the technology in xAPI is not the hard part. You hand the spec over to any programmer worth their salt, and they're like, okay, lady, if that's how you want it, that's how we'll do it, right? Yeah. And so the programming part that is the easy part for developers. Now, I'm an instructional designer. That's not the easy part for me. So I will admit that all the way. But the tricky part is getting an entire industry globally of different tools to all agree to use the same language so that we can get the same stuff out. When all of those tools, particularly the ones that are not inside your LMS, part of their business offering is a great dashboard of all the data that they're collecting. And what we're saying is, take the data, put the data all in a central place, and manage it from there, right? So from an enterprise perspective, I don't want to have to manage learning by tool. You think about how our industry has evolved. SCORM's been great. It means all of us e-learning people can talk to each other, and no problem. But
only within our own tools.
Only within our own tool, right? So if I manage leadership development, or I manage, let's do something really concrete, safety training, right?
Yeah.
I can get who took the course from the LMS. I can take who, and right, that's SCORM. The LMS will also tell me who showed up to the instructor-led training. Great. Right? The LMS may or may, depending on where my standard operating procedure is, it may or not be able to tell me whether I went there. If I actually had an accident, that system is actually recorded somewhere else. And so all these things are these silos. So I can't manage safety training from one system.
Yeah.
And that's the magic here, though, right? So the cohort is a great place to get your feet in and jump in and do projects and make that proof of concept you can bring back to your organization and say, see, we can get this. The tricky part is now I've got clients who say, hey, oh, by the way, Survey Gizmo will send xAPI statements. Did you know that? It's the first tool I have heard of outside of the L&D environment that sends xAPI.
Which one is that?
Survey Gizmo. Totally surprised me. Totally came out of left field. And what it was a client called up and said, can I get my Survey Gizmo into my LMS?
And so you're like, wait, theory, Survey Gizmo sends xAPI statements? And they're like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's it. Right. Because my first answer was, sure, you get all your Survey Gizmo data and you dump it out into a CSV file, and then you use a converter to get it from the CSV account and you batch load it to your LRS. And they're like, no, look at this page here. I was really embarrassed. Right. But the thing here is that and I'm not picking on Survey Gizmo to anybody, because literally today I got a request for, can I get what people do in my SharePoint site? Can I record that in my LMS? Sure, right? And this happens to be someone who has, right? An integrated LMS, LRS product.
Okay.
So yes, right? The trick is, how do we know who you are?
Right.
We have to be able to match that data. And so at an enterprise-wide process, we have to both get the data in a way that's logical and matched up to who you are in the LMS. If you've got a single sign-on environment, that shouldn't be complicated, but that means you need to be talking to your IT team. And then we need to have the tool to get the data out.
Yeah, like, so in database language, they call that a key, right? Like a key table or a key thing, and everything is kind of linked off of that key or a unique ID, right? Yeah, Sam, right on the money. That's what I meant, the translation table. So understanding, the data that came out of SharePoint and the data that came out of the LMS, and then the data that came out of YouTube and the data that came out of someplace else, how do I know which of that data I can associate with person A, person B, person C?
Yes. Yep. And so that's doable, right? That's doable. You just have to know to do it.
Yeah.
So you can't just say, Survey Gizmo will let you put in your, somebody's email address. It comes out as a perfectly valid xAPI statement. But if they're using their personal email address and your LMS has their work email address, you can't match up that data, right? So it's just, there are things that you need to get involved in to think through. And that gets to some of those data considerations that we were talking about with Mel and then with Kristen too.
Yeah. Well, these are the challenges that we're going to have to be that we are all going to encounter, all vendors, users, practitioners, instructional designers, developers. These are those questions that are still coming down the road from a thinking ahead perspective. But it's great to see that there is traction, because I remember thinking about this in the early days when I was first talking with Aaron about this stuff way back when he was first, kind of spearheading this as the granddaddy of xAPI or tin can in the early days. That was always my question. The e-learning stuff is going to be the easy part. How are you going to get Google to send xAPI statements from Gmail? How are you going to get Microsoft to send xAPI statements from Microsoft Word? How are you going to, all of these other systems that people legitimately use to engage with, to learn from, right? That is part of their personal learning ecosystem. How do we get those to send us the data in this new xAPI format? That is the ultimate nut that has to be cracked. And so for years now, we've been waiting to see that, right? And so it's fun to be able to see it happening, but it's still got a ways to go.
It does, right? And so, we were talking about learning tools, and I think like Word and YouTube and stuff like that. Actually, there's a xAPI apps allows you to wrapper and structure a whole bunch of different things that won't be xAPI ready for years, probably, into a coherent learning experience that then records your progress through xAPI. That's really cool. It's the Salesforce.com.
Is that the Zebra Zap stuff?
xAPI apps.
xAPI apps, okay.
xAPI
so apps. That already has some sort of converter then. Is that what you're saying? That
Well, it's a wrapper and a structure, right? So you can create learning activities embedded in it, different checklists, manager checklists. It's got workflows and things like that. But then you can also wrapper up a YouTube video, a Vimeo, all sorts of other things to develop through there, or to deliver that way, right? Okay. And then the trick is, yes, right, it's getting your systems of work to then feed in the performance data. Right. So I like to think about the 8 L's of evaluation, right? And in multiple different facets of things that we can be looking at from an evaluation perspective. And it's one thing, and xAPI will let you do some seriously extreme navel gazing around the learning experience.
Yeah.
And learn a lot, right? But it's the how do we learn more about the working experience and what's happening related to performance as a result of learning, and then vice versa. How do we use performance to be driving what I'm learning?
There you go.
Right? So if I am a salesperson and I am killing it, I am making phone calls all day long and never close anything. Okay? Don't send me a training course on how to open up a lead in Salesforce.com. I probably need the how to overcome objections in Salesforce.com.
There you go.
So you can tailor the learning experience based on what somebody's doing. We did a demo project where we looked at, and we used Twitter just because it was an open API. We could get a lot of information without being logged in.
Yep.
And so you start the learning experience, you put in your Twitter handle. And for that, we used actually the unique identifier in that one, Kara, was your Twitter handle, actually.
Oh, cool.
So there are guidelines, Kara, for, or anybody, for an actor identification in xAPI. Often it's your mail address, but that actually changes if you change jobs. Right. Lucky for me, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon, so my email address never changes. But other people do change. And so there are a number of different ways in which you can identify somebody uniquely. So with this, you put in your Twitter handle, it went out to Twitter and got how many tweets and followers you had. And then we had some just, made up algorithm in the back that counted your tweets and your followers and said, are you an expert? Are you a novice? Or do you not even have an account? And so we then enrolled you in different learning experiences. We fed you different content. We asked you different questions based on your actual work of being in Twitter. So it was.
That's a great way to test that idea, or a proof of concept. Yeah, I love that.
It was super fun. So we've done a bunch of things, that are just like little fiddling around. But it's when organizations come to us and say, "How do I do this at scale? What are the things that I need to think about?"
But it tells a great story, right? I mean, if you can pull in that kind of data from Twitter and be able to make certain assumptions and say, "Hey, I'm going to send you this learning, send you this learning, send you this learning." I think it doesn't take much of a cognitive leap for people to go, "Oh, you could probably do that with this other stuff in my job too," and so that's why yes. I think it's a very cool way to get people to at least be thinking about what they should be doing next.
Yes. And I think that's key. And, when you're at this enterprise scale, right, it was just like Mel and Kristen were saying, right? There's the instructional design side, and then there's the and Ross, right? There's the instructional and the game design side, and then there's the data side, right? And the technology for that. When you do that enterprise scale, you then have the learning and development strategy, and then you have the learning and development, or the IT strategy, right? And how do you get that equivalent of a developer, right? It's the entire IT leadership, and how do you get them on board with what you're doing? Because there are if there are data security issues, there's all sorts of things that as instructional designers and the L&D team, we need to be aware of and know when to bring in the right people.
Yeah, all cool stuff. And we're at about the 11:30 mark, and I want to take us down before we leave. I don't want to take us down a negative road, but I do want to just bring in and just have this conversation. And maybe this isn't something that it should be directed at you, but it dawned on me, as we were having this conversation and whatnot. xAPI is great. It's in our industry. It's what we do. We love it. But there's always these moments where I think to myself, as we're trying to convince all of these other services or enterprise companies and these big products to engage and to embrace xAPI, are there competing standards that might already be doing the things that we want xAPI to do, but that's being done in a different way? I mean, I don't even know if that exists or not, but I'm just curious if from your perspective and seeing a lot of this. I mean, is that kind of where the pushback might come from? Like, hey, we create our own data using blah 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 technology. We don't need this xAPI thing.
So there's a couple of things, right? So Kristen mentioned the IMS Global, which has the Caliper standard, right? Or specification, right? And so Caliper is, on its face, it looks a lot like xAPI. It's doing many of the same things. It is a closed standard where xAPI is an open standard.
Okay.
IMS, the caliper. Sorry, I keep saying standard specification. And although Shelley Blake Block and the IEEE Icicle group are doing great work in continuing to further strengthen the specification with xAPI, it's not actually a standard.
Okay.
The caliper is spending a lot of time defining, right, at exactly where they need to be, the academic learning environment, right? So it looks on the structure of a statement is about the same. Interestingly, their specification is more rigid around what data and context you provide along with that actor, verb, object that we've been talking about all day, right? So, and that, while more rigid generally seems like a bad thing, it's actually awesome because it means that data is there to get reporting on.
Yeah.
Right. So it makes a more standardized statement and set of data that I can then report better on. And no matter who, for example, is sending me a video, I always know that the length of the video or whatever, right, a certain piece of information is included in that statement. So that's really handy. I have seen fewer and fewer people in my corporate and kind of adult, past higher ed world, right, where I work. I've seen fewer and fewer people in the last 2 years say, yeah, but what about caliper? Shouldn't we be doing that? That seems an awful lot the same. So caliper's one. I think it's important to keep that in mind. And there are some conversations between the two. The next big competitor is exactly what you said, which is I can do it myself. Because xAPI isn't magic technology. The magic in it is the interoperability across the industry. You build it yourself on your own set of tools. In order to bring in a new vendor, in order to change it, you have to support that own set of tools and specifications. So I was talking to one of my vendors the other day. Been using them I've been using them to send xAPI statements out of e-learning. I had a question. They're like, yeah, we're updating. And so I don't even have to do anything. Like, nice. My xAPI statements are going to get better. Like, that's great. Right? Republish my courses and good to go. Yeah. And I haven't had to do anything to take advantage of that. So that's really key.
So, so the big behemoths out there, right? Like Salesforce, right? What are the chances of Salesforce ever embracing the xAPI standard and sending out their data? Or is that one of the big systems that we're going to have to just export the data as a CSV, use middleware to convert it to xAPI, and then suck it into an LRS or whatever?
So that's exactly how to do it right now. Here's from in the learning industry, what's happened is it takes people asking their vendors, hey, can I get this as xAPI? Hey, I do xAPI. Hey, are you doing xAPI? The more times people ask, and when I go to expos, I'm actually really obnoxious. I go around to all the other vendor booths, and if there's a cool tool, I say, hey, does this tool do xAPI? And 3 years ago, the answer was, lady, we do all the APIs. Any API you want.
Whatever you want.
Yeah. I'm like, no, I don't want that. I want one API, xAPI, right? And so now, when I go and I ask that same question, the answer is either yes or we're working on it.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that's shift, right? And so the more that we the people who are listening to this recording and who are logged in today, the more we ask those tools, can you do xAPI, the better.
Gotcha.
But right now, no.
Yeah. So do the LRSs do the conversion, or is there middleware right now that will do that conversion for you of that data? Or, how does that work? You mentioned we can do that right now. Like, this is what we can do today. Export that CSV, blah, 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 get it converted into xAPI statements. But I'm just curious if is there a market for that middleware, or is the LRS going to be the middleware that's going to provide that conversion of a CSV file, or how does that work?
Remember the dumb box?
Yep.
The LRS just receives the data. However, the the services around that middleware, right? So Yet Analytics, for example, has a popular converter, and you give it CSV, it will convert it into statements.
Gotcha.
And you specify this column has my actors, and this column has my verb, and this column has my direct object, right? And you have to think about how you want that data to come in.
Yeah, because I'm sure every CSV file out of every single system that you're pulling from probably structures it a little bit differently. Maybe column 2 might be the actor, column 3 might be the verb in one, and then it could be totally switched in somebody else's.
Yeah, and it's not going to be that much different. If you've ever implemented an enterprise scale LMS and you've hooked together the data that comes out of your HR system or your payroll system or whatever, and you've had to feed that in, and then you've had to feed in your data, your historical learning history back into your new LMS. It's the same kind of thing.
Okay.
Like, here's the fields we need. Here's the fields we have. We match them up. We set it. And once we set it once and set it to rock and roll,
you're good. Unless somebody changes it somewhere along the line, and then we forget to change the middleware, and then you start to see the errors, and then you have to go back and figure out where it all happened.
Yes. Yeah.
But that's just tech.
What keeps them all employed?
Yeah. Okay. So that's like the going down the some scary roads here of things might be different, and it didn't turn out to be so scary. So we're all good from that perspective. What else do we need people to know as we get close to needing to kind of wrap this up? What else can we tell people today to help them besides get engaged with the cohort? There's an obvious one, right? What are some things we can share?
Well, there's a couple things. There's a few ways to, a few other things other than the cohort going on to be aware of. One is the Icicle initiative, and I think somebody who's faster on the Google and in the chat than me. I'll keep talking. If somebody wants to
drop that in. What is it? It's Icicle?
Icicle. Yep.
Okay.
And it stands for, it's incredibly clever. I can't remember it right now off the top of my head, but it's really the next phase of shepherding the specification forward through IEEE's process of providing a little bit more structure around using xAPI. And so we have some expectations around what to expect, what is a learning experience engineer, and things like that. Thanks, Kristen. And so those are important discussions happening. The beautiful thing is, this is an open community. You can actually get involved with the special interest groups, with the working groups. Anybody can sign in on the monthly sessions. The website's out there. It's like you can get involved in actually shaping it. So it's the coolest part about this industry right now is that it behooves us all to share more. So it's this super collaborative, fun place that I love having a good time. So the Icicle initiative. The other one is xAPI Ready. So I've got my xAPI Ready mug.
Perfect.
Of course, that comes backwards. On the actual mug, it's not a mirror image. The xAPI Ready is not a specification. It's not a conformance standard. It's basically it's like a badge of, hey, I'm doing it. And so vendors can be xAPI ready, experiences, cohort. If you've done the cohort, if you've sat through this, there's you can consider yourself xAPI ready. It just says like, I'm ready to start the conversation.
So we could put the badge on the TLDC website and say we're xAPI ready.
You totally could. I mean, and if you think about it, I mean, right. So what always cracks me up is that these, and one of these days I'm going to get around to just building a utility that says I did this, because conferences, online events, all sorts of things that talk about xAPI aren't actually using xAPI to track the results of it.
The conversation,
But the next conference you go to, right, the company will have spent thousands of dollars to get you there, and they will have no visibility to what you do.
Yeah. So here's a question and this is a great question, I think, that Sam asked in the chat, and I want to make sure we get a chance to answer it. So it's kind of long, but he says, is anyone coordinating xAPI data to explode the myth of course completions? I'm concerned about resistance to xAPI based on the business getting more accurate but more threatening data. Basically, if people are passing by, randomly clicking around, and now we can see basically that they're doing that, this makes people upset. Is this being addressed?
So I personally don't feel that that's the the specifications body or ADL or ISICL's realm to say, thou shalt have good training, right? And is this being addressed as though we expect somebody else to address it for it, right? And Sam, I understand that where your question is coming from, right? So I know that's not what you're implying there. We now have an opportunity to know whether or not what we're doing is effective. And yes, if you suspect that what you're doing is not effective, that might feel threatening. For me, my other big passion in life is agile project management, iterative development processes. If you don't have data about how people are using and whether or not it's successful, what you're doing, then you are, right, you're missing the boat, right? So this gives you the data that you need to improve. There was a great, it was a great study. Gosh, who did it? I'm not sure it was Sean Putnam. I'm pretty sure I heard the story from Sean Putnam, who said that somebody had done a bunch of help documents and a bunch of help videos, right? So you're all instructional designers. You know the difference in time to produce and change and edit when it changes, a help document versus a help video. What they found using xAPI, and honestly, they could have used anything, any other tracking tool to find this out, just xAPI happened to be, right? That nobody was watching the videos. So at first, that's incredibly threatening. If your job is to make videos, that is very, very threatening to find out that no one is using them, right? On the other hand, it saved this company like 800 hours a year in development of videos nobody looked at. And that same person could take that 800 hours and put it towards something useful.
Yeah.
So that's pretty powerful to me. Yes, threatening at first.
Yeah, and I think, and that's where we need to be speaking more positively, I think, about all of this stuff. And not that you're not, Sam. I get that this is very real to you. You've experienced this with your clients and your customers. Totally get that. But being able to share more stories like that, Megan, right? Like to be able to share that it's a good thing when we have all of this data and we can learn that something's not being used, because now we can be more focused on being hyper targeting our resources in the right directions that adds the most value to the business. That makes us really good, valuable business partners with the executives. And as long as we can tell that story and share those types of successes, now we're speaking the language of business that our executives and our leadership, I think, will understand. And I don't think that we should be so afraid.
Well, and I think, think about it the other direction too, right? I'm sure we've all worked in environments where there's an executive or a business sponsor or someone who loves video. Everything's got to be video. And we're like, I don't have time for video. Right. And so the flip side is that you're able to have the data to say, hey, this is something that's used or not used in our organization. Right. And I think video is great, as we talk here on a video platform, right? That video is great for a lot of things. And we don't know which things within a particular context and a particular culture are going to work and not work, but we can get the data to measure that. So we're not guessing.
Yeah, and you're right. I think it's hugely important. I'll be the first to say that I'm a big video proponent, right? I know Sam is too. I know we're all in on it, but I'll also be the first to say that I do know when it's not going to be necessary. And I'm happy to not use it when there's something easier to solve the business problem that I'm trying to solve, because I do know how much time it takes to make a good video, to create good content. And it also depends on understanding your audience too, right? And all of these things, we can get better focus on them by having the data. And that's that part that I think makes xAPI so exciting, is that us being able to make more smarter decisions about the design work that we do and the solutions that we create, because we now have that data, I think is got to be hands down the most important reason for everybody to be excited about xAPI.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, I think there's this gives us, right, all those things that we know we should be measuring. I mean, if you're a fan of Kathy Moore's action mapping, the 70-20-10, Gottfredson and Mosier's 5 moments of learning need, right? All those things, we know we should be tracking all that stuff and measuring all that stuff, and we can't with SCORM. So here we can, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. My, I don't think I told my contractor that I'm actually going live for 4 hours today. So I think he's pounding up some concrete in the master bath right next door. So can you guys hear that, or are we good?
Only a little bit. It's not bad.
Because it's really bad for me. Anyways, well, this has been great, Megan. Thank you so much for hanging out with us and talking about this. How can people get connected with you or with the cohort or get more connected around xAPI at this point?
So there's a couple of things. I know I think it was Kara posted the xAPI ready link. I will put in here in chat oops. Oh, I'm struggling here with typing. For the cohort. And if you're going to Learning Solutions next week in Orlando, there is we'll have actually an xAPI ready booth. So a bunch of us who are doing xAPI and committed to helping people out with that will be there and just jamming.
I think
really.
I'm spend a little time in that booth with you, so that'll be fun.
We will hang out for sure. I know at DevLearn last year, before DemoFest started, I'm sure people thought I was crazy. I ran around the entire room before they let people in, and I went to every table and I said, is your project an xAPI project? And about half of them, I'm rounding up a little bit, about half of them were xAPI-based projects. And I want to say that the last 4 winners between Learning Solutions and DevLearn, the last 4 Best of Show winners have been xAPI projects, including one that was an xAPI cohort project. So in a single cohort session, they went from concept to DemoFest Best of Show. So
yeah,
that's
oh my gosh,
cool.
That's very cool. And then that says a lot, right? I mean, that tells a pretty interesting story right there in and of itself, that xAPI is catching on. People are starting to get used to it. The vendors are starting to embrace it a little bit more and bringing it all together. I think now is a great time for people. If you've been holding off, if you weren't really sure about it, now is a really, really good time to be engaging with the cohort, with xAPI in general, teaching yourself, watching some videos, practicing, getting some hands-on, and building some stuff, right? Kristen does such a great example of, just doing it. Come up with a crazy idea and just build it. And just make it happen. It's a great way to learn.
Well, and that's what I love about the work that Kristen and Mel and Ross are doing. And they're sharing it, right? They're out there, they're sharing and blogging about it, which is awesome. Marco reminded me next. So there's next week is Learning Solutions. There's an xAPI camp on the first day. In April, there is ATD Houston has a technology conference. The day before that is an xAPI day. There's lots and lots of stuff. I believe xAPI Camp is thinking about having an East Coast camp sometime. I'm having a xAPI party and download conference. It's 2 adjacent days in May. So there's lots and lots going on, different opportunities to get involved.
Awesome. Well, that's just fantastic. What a great way to wrap this up, Megan. Thank you so much for taking the time and hanging out with us and being in the chat and adding such great value throughout the whole morning. We really, really appreciate it.
Happy to. This has been a lot of fun and way to kick off the playlist idea.
Oh, thank you.
This was great.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. We might change things up a little bit, but we'll it's a big experiment and we're gonna see how it goes from here. So anyways, thanks again so much. I'm going to close out your video, but we'll still be here for a few minutes. All right. Good to
All
see you.
right.
Thanks again. All right, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with us today on this playlist. You guys are all so awesome and chilling out. I hope you all learned a ton today on xAPI and all of the different aspects around it. And this idea of a playlist, we want to know what you guys think. Is this an interesting thing to do 4 sessions back to back? Or, you know, is there a different idea or a different way that we can do this type of topic-based conversation for the TLDC community? So let me know what you think and give us some feedback as we begin to make some decisions around this. But you guys are all fantastic. Don't forget to hit up the website and become a member if you want to be more deeply engaged with what we're doing here at TLDC, and also just sign up for the newsletter and anything else that you want to engage with. Don't forget to join the Slack group. That's another one. Hit up our Slack group, because a lot of the links, a lot of the things that were discussed here, we will continue to have a conversation around over in the Slack group. And let's see what else. And we're probably going to be making sure that everybody gets informed about all of the things that are coming up in the near future. So good times and an excellent way to kick off the week. What a powerful Monday. And thank you all so much for being here, and we will see you tomorrow.
Bye.